Tonight's stories are real. A man stranded on a dark forest road, a neighbor found standing inside someone's house, and two strangers who came back when they knew she was alone. These aren't ghost stories. These are the kind of encounters that could happen to anyone. Hey everyone, tonight's video is packed with genuinely eerie, spine-chilling, and deeply unsettling stories. So settle in with a drink, get comfortable, and maybe think twice about watching this one alone in the dark. And before we dive in, if you enjoy content like this, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and leave a comment to help the algorithm spread the word. It genuinely makes a huge difference and helps the channel grow. Your support means more than I can say. Thank you. Now, this story has stuck with me for years. To this day, I still find myself thinking about it, especially when I'm driving alone late at night. Back then, I was making a living doing general repair work, mostly carpentry, some minor electrical fixes, and general maintenance for cabins and small properties. These were mostly owned by folks who either rented them out or didn't come around often. The work paid decently, but what I really liked was the solitude. No boss breathing down my neck, no co-workers to deal with, just me, my tools, and the task at hand. This particular job had me working in a cabin tucked away in a remote wooded area, about an hour-and-a-half drive from where I lived at the time. You know the kind of place, the sort where cell service is non-existent, and if your car breaks down, you could be stranded for hours before another vehicle comes by. The cabin belonged to a man who only used it during hunting season, so it had been sitting vacant for several months. It needed some repairs, a leaky roof, a broken window frame, little odds and ends like that. I got started early in the morning, and by the time I wrapped things up, the sun was already slipping low in the sky. I debated staying the night in the cabin. It wasn't exactly cozy, but it was functional enough, but ultimately decided against it. I had things to take care of the next day, and the thought of waking up alone out there didn't really appeal to me. So I packed up my tools, loaded everything into my truck, and set off down the long dirt road back home. Now when I say road, that's being generous. It was more of a narrow dirt trail, barely wide enough for one vehicle at a time. If two cars met head-on, someone would have to back up to a wider spot to let the other pass. A rare occurrence given how isolated the area was. I'd driven this road earlier in the day and knew what to expect. Uneven ground, overgrown edges, trees so dense they formed a canopy overhead. By now the sun was almost gone, and with it went any lingering daylight. In places like that, shadows seem to eat up whatever light is left really fast. I had the radio playing softly as I drove. I was feeling a little tired and sore from working all day, but mostly just looking forward to getting home for a hot shower and something decent to eat, preferably not gas station snacks for once. About 20 minutes into the drive out, I saw something unexpected. Headlights coming toward me in the distance. That alone put me on edge. I hadn't seen a single other vehicle for the entire day, not while I was working on the cabin, not on my way in, and suddenly there was someone else out there on this forgotten stretch of forest trail. Instinctively, I eased off the gas to slow down as we approached each other. As they got closer, my unease grew for reasons I couldn't quite figure out. The other car was moving slowly too, almost cautiously, and before long we both came to a stop about 20 or 30 feet apart. It felt like we were sizing each other up. My first reaction was that this was normal. Either I needed to reverse or they did. Glancing in my rearview mirror, I realized there was a small clearing not far behind me, where I could pull back and make room for them to pass. I rolled my window down just enough to stick my arm out and gave them a quick wave, signaling that I'd reverse. But before I could shift into reverse gear, both front doors of their car swung open at the same time. Two men stepped out. This is where everything took an unsettling turn. From the moment they exited their vehicle, something felt off, wrong in a way that sent an instinctive chill through me. The first thing I noticed was their clothing. It wasn't appropriate for where we were. It didn't belong at all. They were dressed in these long flowing garments that looked somewhere between robes and coats. It wasn't anything practical or casual for the woods. It almost reminded me of those strange outfits you'd see in documentaries about cults or rituals you don't want any part of. Something about their shape and how they moved in them made it even more unnerving. And then they just stood there, white staring. They started walking toward my truck without a word at first. I sat there for a moment, hands still gripping the wheel, assuming they might ask for directions or something mundane. But the longer I watched them approach, the less sense that assumption made. There was no hesitation in their steps, no trace of uncertainty. They were heading straight for me, as if they already knew exactly what they wanted to do. One of them moved up to my window while the other hung back, just a step behind and slightly off to the side. As they got closer, I caught a smell. Alcohol definitely, but something else mixed in, something sharp and sour that I couldn't place. The man closest to my window leaned down, peering inside. His tone wasn't hostile, but it wasn't friendly either. It was flat and deliberate, like he was asking a question he already knew the answer to. "What are you doing out here?" he asked. I answered truthfully, explaining that I was repairing a cabin further down the trail and was just heading home for the day. But as the words left my mouth, there was no reaction on his part, just this unsettling, silent stare. Meanwhile, the second guy shifted his weight from one foot to the other, glancing around uneasily like he couldn't stand still. Something about this whole situation felt off. I tried to diffuse the tension, offering to back up and let them pass. That's when everything fell apart. In a flash, before I had time to process it, the first guy reached through the open window and gripped the edge of the glass. With a sharp crack of pressure, he smashed it inward. It didn't fully shatter, but shards of broken glass scattered across the seat and into the door panel. I froze, hands gripping the wheel as my mind struggled to catch up with what had just happened, and then I saw the second guy stepping forward, holding a gun. He wasn't pointing it at me yet, but his posture said more than enough. It was aimed downward but close enough to send an unmistakable message. "Get out of the truck," one of them ordered. For a second, I thought about trying to drive off, but I felt paralyzed by how fast it all escalated. I couldn't move. I couldn't think clearly enough to act. So instead, I opened the door and stepped out, my breath catching in my throat as the cold air hit me. Or maybe it wasn't the air at all. Maybe it was just pure adrenaline surging through me. My hands had started trembling despite every effort to keep calm. I asked them what this was about. My voice felt thin in the dense silence between us. The man who'd smashed the window just smiled at me, not in a warm or amused way, but in this unnerving, hollow way that only added to my fear. "You want to come to a party?" he asked suddenly. Of all things he could have said, that was not what I expected. For a second I thought I must have misheard him. It didn't fit what was happening at all. I stammered out a reply, "No, I'm just trying to get home." He ignored me and went on, asking if I wanted to eat something. He started describing some type of meat in detail, with an unsettling enthusiasm, claiming it tasted incredible and unlike anything I'd ever had before. There was something grotesque about how he said it, something that turned my stomach even more than the situation already had. The second guy chuckled softly in response, but his laughter was erratic and spacey, like his mind was somewhere else or he was high on something stronger than just alcohol. My instincts were screaming now. "Look," I said firmly, "I'm not interested in anything you're selling. You need to back off." That's when the guy with the gun shifted it just slightly, a calculated shift that told me subtle warnings were over. The first guy stepped closer now, and I could see his face clearly under the faint moonlight. Bloodshot eyes darting with unrelenting focus, sweat dripping down his temple, and something dark smeared on his sleeve. Something I didn't want to think about too much. I repeated myself, raising my voice a little louder this time, telling them to leave me alone, but instead of answering directly, the second guy lunged forward suddenly, raising his fist like he meant to strike me. His movement was clumsy, uncoordinated, but still dangerous enough to rattle me further. This is what sticks with me most. What happened next might have saved my life. Or maybe it wouldn't have mattered. I'll never know for sure. Desperation kicked in, and before thinking too much, I blurted out that my location was being tracked. I did report it. The moment I got a signal, I called it in and later provided a complete statement. I described the men, their car, and every detail I could remember. But nothing came of it. No one matched the description, and that still unsettles me. Those two didn't seem lost, random, or even just aggressive in an ordinary way. It felt more deliberate, like they were part of something bigger. It was as if I had accidentally crossed into a situation I wasn't meant to witness. It didn't feel coincidental. It felt like I had interrupted something carefully orchestrated. And whatever it was, I'm certain it wasn't just those two. "My name's Crystal," I was about 30 at the time, just turned or close to it. I had recently relocated there because I thought it was the kind of fresh start I needed. For a few years, I'd been working at a small clothing shop in town that sold everyday wear. I'd started toying with the idea of launching an online store, selling things like custom pieces or thrifted clothes I'd altered myself. It hadn't gained any traction yet, but I kept convincing myself the right environment would help me focus and make it happen. That's how I ended up in this rented house, far more isolated than anywhere I'd ever lived before. It wasn't completely remote, though. The town was about 20 minutes away by car. But once you got home, things felt still like time slowed down. The house was a single-story place with a backyard that edged into a patch of trees. Affordable, which was priority number one for me at the time. It wasn't luxurious, but it was quiet, peaceful even, and gave me room to breathe. A few other houses dotted the area, just close enough to register any changes, but far enough apart to miss the usual camaraderie of neighbors. My days settled into a routine: work during the day, come home in the evening, sit down with my laptop and try to build my online business idea, piece by piece. There was comfort in the regularity of it all, more than I realized back then. But in hindsight, I think I was also trying to prove to myself that I was more self-reliant than I felt. Living alone out there had its moments, especially at night, when the quiet turned into something suffocating rather than soothing. There was an empty property next door when I first moved in, or so I thought. No one seemed to live there. No lights came on at night and it looked abandoned. Then, a couple of weeks later, a trailer appeared on the lot along with signs of life. At first it barely registered. People move in and out all the time, right? But then I saw him. It's hard to describe without it sounding overblown, but there was something off about him. Not anything he overtly did at first, but how he moved and held himself. He had this strange posture, and a habit of standing still for too long, like he wasn't sure what to do with his limbs sometimes. The first time I noticed him properly, he was by the edge of his yard, just watching in my direction. Looking. Staring. I brushed it off as nerves, a side effect of being in unfamiliar surroundings. You're overthinking, I told myself. You moved somewhere new. It's natural for everything to feel strange. Still unsettled, I went inside and left it at that. But the next day it happened again, only this time he stood closer. It became a pattern after that. Sometimes he'd just stand still in his yard. Other times he'd amble around slowly with no clear purpose, but would drift closer and closer to our shared boundary, as if it didn't exist for him at all. His behavior made my skin crawl in ways that were difficult to articulate. The first time he actually stepped into my backyard is one of the clearest memories from that time. Probably because of how uneasy it made me feel and how hard I tried not to let it show. I had been outside hanging some clothes on the line when I noticed him behind me. He appeared so silently that I hadn't even heard him approach. Just like that, he was standing a few steps into my yard, staring at the ground as if studying something intently. My immediate reaction was discomfort, a deep, instinctive sense that something wasn't right, but I forced myself to stay calm and asked him if he needed something. He didn't respond at first, just stood there like he hadn't even heard me. Finally, he tilted his head slightly, as though processing what I'd said, then spoke words that didn't make any sense to me. It wasn't an answer to my question, but something unrelated, something vague about keeping things clean or watching how things grow. His tone made it sound like we were where I had started to anticipate it, sensing his presence long before I saw him. Shadows shifting in my peripheral vision would pull my gaze toward the fence line where he'd sometimes linger, or worse, he'd already have wandered into my yard. Every time I confronted him, he'd leave without fuss, muttering those same bizarre, disjointed remarks. They weren't threatening exactly, but they definitely weren't normal. I kept telling myself that if things escalated, I'd take action, reach out to the landlord, maybe even call the police. But I also couldn't shake the nagging feeling of doubt. Was I overreacting? He hadn't done anything overtly wrong. He didn't damage anything or act violent. Still, it felt off. And in the back of my mind, I was afraid of coming across as paranoid or unreasonable. But then there was the day when everything shifted, though at the time I didn't understand just how much. It was early afternoon, and I was home working on my laptop when I heard the soft tapping on my front door. He'd never come to the door before. I hesitated but eventually opened it. He was standing there, startlingly close. For the first time I could see him clearly. His clothes looked like they'd been through years of strain, fraying at the edges and stretched in odd places. His face seemed unreadable, his expression so neutral that it unsettled me. Something about his eyes seemed off, eerie, like he was watching a play that only he could follow. Then he spoke, and for once it wasn't cryptic or strange. He asked if I needed help cleaning my backyard. For a fleeting moment it felt almost ordinary, a reasonable question from a stranger who might have needed work. Relief flickered through me before vanishing as quickly as it came. The memory of all our prior encounters crashed down on me. None of this made sense. I declined, politely but firmly, and made it clear I didn't need help. He lingered in the doorway for a few seconds longer, then felt appropriate, as if expecting a different answer. Then, with a nod and no word of goodbye, he turned and walked away, that unsettling detachment radiating off him once more. That night, I found myself double-checking the locks before bed, a new habit I'd unconsciously picked up since his visit to my doorstep. At the time, I convinced myself it was just precautionary, but deep down I knew it was something more than that. A week later, everything unraveled. It was late at night. I had already gone through my usual routine, brushing my teeth, turning out most of the lights, and was sitting on the edge of my bed, scrolling through my phone one last time before sleep. I got this prickly feeling in my gut, an unshakable urge to do just one final sweep of the house. Since his appearance at my door, it had become a ritual of sorts. As I opened the bedroom door to check the hallway, I expected nothing but empty shadows cast by the dim light filtering from the window at the end of the corridor. Instead, what greeted me made my blood freeze. He was there, standing less than a foot from me in the doorway. For a few disorienting seconds, my mind struggled to process what my eyes were seeing. It didn't seem possible that he was inside my house, standing so close that leaning forward would have brought me into contact with him. The shock only grew when I realized what he was wearing: my clothes. A top I had worn earlier that week hung on his frame unnaturally. It sagged where it shouldn't have, stretched taut in other places, all wrong for his body shape. That one detail hit me like a freight train, harder even than his sudden appearance. My skin crawled in revulsion at the sight of him wearing. Something pulled from my laundry area, my space. His expression was fixed in that same strange blankness, neutral to an almost grotesque degree, but his eyes betrayed some inner purpose, as if his mind were occupied by something I couldn't possibly comprehend. He wasn't angry. He didn't scream or snarl or try to intimidate me. If anything, he appeared calm but eerily focused. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just some strange man being weird or lost or maybe harmlessly confused, as I had tried to convince myself earlier. Most of this was deliberate. My body reacted before my mind could catch up with reality. A lurching wave of cold dread clenched my chest as he suddenly moved toward me. Not fast exactly, but with intent, as if he had been waiting patiently for this confrontation to happen all along. I'm not even sure how I did it. Adrenaline took over, but within an instant I slammed the door shut. I expected to hear something, footsteps, banging, anything, but there was nothing. Just silence. And somehow that silence was worse than any noise could have been. It hung in the air, heavy and oppressive, making it feel as if he was still there, just standing on the other side of the door, waiting. When the police arrived, I stayed in my room, clutching onto the fleeting sense of safety it provided, until they assured me it was safe to come out. By the time I finally stepped into the hallway, it was empty. There was no trace of him, no sign he had ever been there at all. The officers searched the house thoroughly as I tried to explain everything. Even as I spoke, my words sounded unreal to my own ears, as if I were describing a bad dream rather than something that had actually happened. But they listened closely. They took me seriously. I could tell they believed me. I wasn't exaggerating or making things up. The fear in my voice was real. A few hours later, they found him in a trailer on his property. I didn't see it myself, but apparently he had been there the entire time, acting as though nothing had happened. They arrested him, and that was the last direct connection I had with him. Afterward, I moved out of the house. The idea of staying there made my skin crawl. Something about it had shifted permanently after that night. It had absorbed the fear and unease and changed into a place I couldn't bring myself to call home anymore. This all happened when I was in my early 20s. At the time, I was living with my parents in a rural area where life was predictable to the point of monotony. Nothing ever really happened, or so I thought. My name is Hannah. My life back then was simple enough. Working part-time, saving up money and trying to figure out what I wanted for my future. Most days followed a steady rhythm. Wake up early, help out around the house, drive to work, return in the afternoon and spend a quiet evening at home. My parents both worked too, but their schedules often overlapped in ways that left me alone for a few hours, almost every day. It wasn't something that ever worried me. On that particular day, it was mid-afternoon, not late by any stretch. I'd just gotten home from work and had changed into comfortable clothes. I think I was in the kitchen making something to eat, going through the motions of yet another ordinary day, when it happened. A knock at the front door. It startled me for a second, but only because I hadn't been expecting anyone. People would stop by occasionally. It wasn't unheard of. Sometimes it would be neighbors. Other times it might be someone lost and asking for directions. Since we lived in a sparsely marked area, it wasn't unusual. Still, I remember feeling mildly annoyed at the interruption because I had just begun to unwind. I opened the door to find two men standing on the porch. I didn't recognize either of them. That in itself wasn't too unusual. We didn't live in a neighborhood where everyone knew everyone else. But something about them felt off. It's hard to describe exactly why that is even now. They looked like anyone else might, wearing plain clothes, but somehow they felt out of place. Maybe it was how they stood there, too still and deliberate, like they were measuring every move or word before doing or saying anything. One of them asked me about a farm and mentioned a name I can't remember now, someplace I'd never heard of before. I told him there wasn't anything by that name nearby as far as I knew. That should have been it. They nodded politely and said something like, "All right," before turning to leave. But then came the part that I still haven't been able to shake. As they turned away, both men glanced past me into the house. Not a casual glance, but an almost probing look, deliberate and slow. Like they were scanning something or taking mental notes. I remember feeling uneasy almost immediately, a tiny knot tightening in my stomach. Still, I tried to shrug it off as harmless curiosity. People are nosy sometimes. Maybe they just wanted to see what kind of house we lived in. That's what I told myself as I closed the door and locked it behind me. Even then, though, I couldn't quite shake that feeling. For several minutes after they left, I just stood frozen in the kitchen, listening intently. For what? I didn't know. Just something. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me, and I went to one of the front windows to peek outside. I saw them walking away down the road. They never looked back. Not that I noticed anyway. Later that evening, when my parents got home, I casually mentioned what had happened. Two guys greeted them with a simple hello, and the moment the words left his mouth, the car roared to life and sped away. He didn't chase after it, but something about the situation unsettled him. He mentioned it later, speaking in that same calm tone he always used, as if to downplay it. Yet there was a subtle tension in his voice, a trace of unease he didn't fully articulate. At the time, I thought again of those two men we'd seen earlier, but it was fleeting. A momentary whisper of a thought I quickly dismissed. It didn't feel like anything significant, certainly not something that could spiral into anything serious. That lingering complacency is what bothers me most now, the ease with which I brushed it all aside. About a week later, I was home alone. It was around the same hour, perhaps a little later, though not yet nighttime. The day had been overcast, giving everything an indistinct dullness, and the house felt unusually dim despite the lingering daylight. I was lying on my bed in my room, surrounded by silence, when I heard a sound that immediately felt wrong. It was faint at first, like a muted thud, as if something heavy was pressing or striking against wood. My body tensed, but I justified it as something outside and got up to investigate. As I stepped into the hallway, the sound grew clearer and closer. It was coming from the back of the house, low and deep, methodical. Someone was attempting to force something open. I moved cautiously down the hall but stopped midway, straining to listen. And then it came, a sharp crack, the unmistakable snap of wood breaking under pressure. Everything suddenly shifted into high gear, though paradoxically, it felt like time slowed down. The back door had given way, swinging inward slightly. In an instant, reality crashed down on me. I wasn't just hearing noises. Someone was breaking in. No, not someone, them. The same two men from before. Recognition hit me like ice water. Their faces were etched into my memory, even amidst the panic. There was no mistaking it. This wasn't random. It wasn't a misunderstanding. They had come back. I turned instinctively to run, but I didn't make it far before one of them grabbed me from behind. His grip was vice-like, pulling me backward. Escape was impossible in those first few moments. My senses blurred under the weight of fear, except for one bizarrely vivid detail. The staleness of his clothing's smell clinging to my nose like it wouldn't let go. For reasons I can't explain, my mind got stuck on that small detail even as they began dragging me toward the back door. Their movements weren't frantic but deliberate. They had a plan. Suddenly things shifted again. One of them spoke, his voice low but sharp. "Let's do it here. Let's do it here." There was no ambiguity about what he meant, and with those words my stomach twisted into an icy knot. Then the other man snapped back at him without hesitation, his voice taut with anger and resolve. "No! Let's take her." They started arguing there in the middle of my home, each tugging in opposing directions as their coordination fractured. This unexpected rift between them saved me. What just moments before had been terrifyingly controlled suddenly veered into chaos. As their argument escalated into shouts and shoves, they loosened their hold on me, distracted by their fight with each other. Finally, one shoved the other hard enough to send him stumbling, and in that split second, they lost whatever twisted plan they'd prepared so carefully. It gave me enough time to wrench free and scramble away until space separated us. They must have realized their mistake because just as quickly as everything began, they stopped. They looked at each other briefly without saying another word, and then bolted out the broken door they'd forced, their way through just minutes earlier. I stood frozen in the hallway after they vanished into the world beyond my yard. The house descended into a suffocating silence once again. My hands were shaking uncontrollably, while the rest of me felt numb in an almost surreal way. Snapping out of my paralysis, I grabbed my phone with trembling fingers and called 911 before dialing my parents. The police arrived swiftly, but by then there was no sign of them, just shards of broken door frames and disorder left in their wake. While recounting what happened to the officers, although still reeling, I learned that this wasn't some spur-of-the-moment crime after all. Those men had likely been watching our house for days, maybe longer, carefully gathering information about when people came and went, who lived inside and when they would be alone. Everything changed after that day in ways I'm not sure I fully understand even now. Even now, it doesn't feel like a distant memory that gradually fades with time. It just lingers quietly in the back of my mind, always present. Sometimes it resurfaces without warning, like when I hear a car slowing down outside or an unexpected knock at the door. Without intending to, I find myself replaying that moment, the way everything changed so suddenly. Honestly, I don't think I would have gotten away if they hadn't turned on each other, even if it was only for a few seconds. That part stays with you, no matter how much time passes.